Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So, invasion of Russia has begun according to the infographics show. We're going to get into that video right after this. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Join the Patreon if you want to support me more. And let's just get straight into the troops. Enjoy.
On May 22nd, 2023, Russia was invaded, but it wasn't the start of a much-feared Ukrainian counterattack. It was Russia invading Russia? Early in the day, an undisclosed number of troops, estimated around 70, pushed into the Belgorod Oblast in Russia from the Ukrainian border. The men were quickly identified as the Freedom of Russia Legion and Russian Volunteer Corps.
Russian Volunteer Corps. From the news articles I've been reading, there's not many people too willing to volunteer for Russian offences, especially in Ukraine. Maybe we're getting painted the wrong picture and given the wrong information, but what do you think in the comments, troops?
Two unaffiliated groups who share a similar goal, defeating Russia in Ukraine and beyond. These all-Russian groups consist of men who have fled from their homeland and are determined to fight on until the Putin regime is toppled and Russia is liberated. A tall task indeed. Before we go into the invasion of the Belgorod Oblast, though, who exactly are these groups? The Freedom of Russian Legion, or the Free Russia Legion, was established 1 month after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The initial founding members all responded to President Volodymyr Zelensky's call for foreign volunteers willing to defend Ukraine from the Russian onslaught. Already disgusted with the Putin regime and his growing dictatorship, groups of Russian volunteers crossed the border to fight against their countrymen. However, the core group allegedly was made up of a company of Russian soldiers who defected. With help from the Security Service of Ukraine, the defectors crossed enemy lines on February 27th with the stated goal of protecting Ukraine from real fascists. The company
That's a good thing in regards to having experienced Russian soldiers understand how Russia works as a military, being able to, bring that experience into Ukraine. That's the kind of information that Ukraine needs and wants, okay?
Commander then made a public appeal to other Russian forces, asking them to switch sides in order to save their country from, quote, humiliation and destruction. On April 5th, 3 men in military fatigues and black balaclavas held a press conference in Kyiv. There they announced the official formation of the Freedom of Russia Legion, claiming that they had been tricked by the Putin regime into carrying out a war of genocide. Their numbers were quickly bolstered by captured POWs who preferred to fight back against Russian forces than simply sit in Ukrainian POW camps.
So do you think this is the way the war's going to go? We're going to actually see more of an escalation into Russian-occupied territory? Because I've been thinking a lot about this. Now, we're talking a lot about Ukraine per se, i.e. that country and how they're defending it within that country, but does it not inevitably end with other countries, mainly Ukraine, pushing into Russia and just attacking them that way and allowing Russia to, disperse its actual troops into different regions within their country, further stretching their capability, stretching their ability to resupply from those positions and fighting on multiple fronts. We understand that Russia can't fight on multiple fronts just because their resupply and logistics is terrible.
This created a high degree of mistrust between the Legion and the Ukrainian armed forces, but many of these POWs had been forced to fight in the first place. The UAF would gradually grow to trust the Legion as they undertook various dangerous missions in defense of Ukraine. The Legion would begin to gain some fame as they were interviewed by Ukrainian media. Soon, foreign media picked up the story and brought attention to this group of Russians who had chosen to fight against their countrymen. The recruitment of Igor Volobyev, former vice president of Gazprom Bank, immediately increased the group's profile and has been the Legion's most famous recruit to date. Some say it also caused significant concern in the Kremlin, because if such a senior official was willing to pick up arms and fight against Russian forces, then how many more were willing to silently sabotage the war effort from within?
Yeah, silently sabotaging the war effort from within is one of the major ways in which this war is going to be won. How many top individuals from a certain country can you get pushing against this? I mean, if you think about it logically, you're not just pushing against the war, you're pushing against the regime within Russia. So for me, and this might sound a little bit drastic, what does the end result in Ukraine look like? It looks like, possibly an end to the regime in Russia anywhere. Definitely means Russia relieving Putin from his power. That's what I would say. It doesn't just end with Ukraine getting the win. It ends further than that. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts.
Scored leaks of Pentagon classified intelligence showed that Russia had good reason to fear this, as the U.S. was being freely given access to very detailed information that only individuals in high-profile positions could possibly have access to. The Freedom of Russia Legion wears their own version of the Russian flag, with white, blue, and white stripes. They also wear the blue and yellow colors of the Ukrainian flag to signify their allegiance to the Ukrainian armed forces. While their compatriots on the other side of no man's land sport Zs on their vehicles, the Legion instead uses the letter L, standing for Legion and Liberty. Nobody knows just how many Legionnaires there are, and everyone involved is keeping it a secret. The Kremlin claims that the Legion doesn't exist, and is instead a fabrication of the Ukrainian intelligence services. However, this is almost certainly not true, given that verified Russian citizens work as the Legion's spokespeople, and also because the Kremlin lies about everything. Some people believe the Legion might have as many as 2 battalions or 2,000 men in its service. However, any statement from the Legion itself only claims hundreds. This could be more misdirection in order to make the Legion seem less of a threat than it really is, though the Legion claims to have support in most major Russian cities, and there may be some truth to that, given the steadily increasing numbers of arson and sabotage attacks inside of Russia. Shortly after the formation of the Legion, there have been over 100 mysterious arson attacks inside Russia. Some of these attacks
I see these attacks getting more focused within Russia as well. I think they're going to become more prominent. Unfortunately, it always means blue on blue, i.e., civilians being targeted, collateral damage increase, and all of that. But it's happening in Ukraine right now, unapologetically from the Russians. So something has to topple. And the more we see of that happening within Russia, what's going to happen is the local populace, the civilians within those areas where it's happening are going to be turned against the regime anyway. Really, really hard with the misinformation that they're receiving at this moment in time. You've got to understand the way their media works, propaganda. It's completely focused on the opposite information we're getting. Okay, so the people who are living there are being told a very different story.
Have focused on high-profile targets, and this separates them from the string of fires that have targeted Russian recruitment stations and are largely attributed to Russians unhappy with the mobilizations. Targets struck by either Ukrainian intelligence agents or possible legionnaires include a governor's home, the Central Research Institute of the Aerospace Defense Forces, multiple chemical plants, fuel depots, and military bases, the business center which runs the offices responsible for the Russian pension fund, Rosatom Institute of Digital Technology, Zagorsk Optical Mechanical Plant, which produces optical, thermal, and night vision systems, the Admiral Kuznetsov aircraft carrier, the FSB building, and the Defense Ministry itself. The sheer number of attacks and their high-profile targets lend serious credibility to the Legion's claims to have support all across Russia.
See, this is something that I didn't really know was going on or was as prominent as what it is right here. Hundreds of different attacks within the Russian mainland. This type of stuff doesn't really get put out there. Certainly not put out there from the information I'm getting anyway. I wonder why that is. I wonder why it's been suppressed in that way.
And may hint at some very high-level support, which should significantly worry Putin. The Kremlin's response has been to claim the Legion doesn't exist and is purely a PR project undertaken by Ukrainian intelligence. However, despite claiming the Legion doesn't exist, Putin signed a law on July 14, 2022, specifically targeting Russians who defect to the enemy during armed conflict or hostilities. Any defectors will face a prison sentence of up to 20 years.
Wow, that's crazy. And that 20 years within Russian prisons, military prisons, is going to be pretty tough. You're probably not going to make it out of that 20 years alive. Let's be honest, troops, all right? You're going to get absolutely hammered in there.
And a year later, in March 2023, the Supreme Court of Russia declared the Legion a terrorist group, a legion which officially the Kremlin doesn't believe exists.
It's crazy. Terrorists calling other people terrorists doesn't really make any sense whatsoever.
Kremlin propaganda outlets parrot the official Putin stance that the Legion is pure propaganda, and all those explosions and fires, probably just more smoking accidents. Not to be confused with the Freedom of Russia Legion, the Russian Volunteer Corps are a separate group of fighters affiliated with Ukraine and also made up of Russian immigrants. Formed in August 2022, the RVC is made up of Russian volunteers who started their resistance against the Putin regime in 2014, fighting alongside the Azov Regiment and other Ukrainian units, while the Freedom of Russia Legion is more cosmopolitan and made up of a significant number of former POWs. The Russian Volunteer Corps is largely made up of Russian right-wing immigrants who moved to Ukraine before and after the Russian invasion.
This is so complicated. All the information that's coming out makes this war Really, really complex.
There are many claims that the RVC are a far-right group with some extreme ideologies, but as the old saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. The RVC's stated goal is defending Ukraine from Russia's invasion and ultimately toppling Vladimir Putin and his regime. According to the group, Russia should give up all ambitions to restore the old Soviet Union and instead focus on improving life for ethnic Russians. Known to have many neo-Nazi sympathizers, many volunteers have fled Russia as early as the 2000s. Many were motivated by their belief that Ukraine was a more ethnically pure country with a strong Slavic heritage.
I'm interested to know more about this, actually. So, I'm not expecting many Russians to watch this video, but there's plenty of people from other parts of Europe, Ukraine mainly. What is the opinion from the Russian people, do you think? Do they actually enjoy the way their country is run? Are they in agreement with the way it's run? I know you're going to have two different sides of any story, but they can't be happy with the way the world's going at this moment in time and the way Putin is doing things in Ukraine, right? That just, to me, it doesn't really sit well, no matter how much misinformation that goes on. Surely there's people within Russia who understand that this is wrong, right? I'm just completely blasé about the whole thing. How do they feel from their perspective is what I would like to know. Are they in agreement or against this? Let me know.
They either moved willingly or fled in a bid to escape prosecution for their hate or political activities. In their eyes, Vladimir Putin has turned Russia into a corrupt, multinational state that has weakened ethnic Russians. When the 2014 invasion of Crimea began, many who would make up the Russian Volunteer Corps willingly joined far-right Ukrainian units, such as the Azov Regiment, and still hope to topple Putin and build an ethnically unified Russia with a separate nation for ethnic minorities to live in. There's been a significant concern that Ukraine's use of Russian far-right groups will only help to fuel Putin's propaganda about Ukraine being run by neo-Nazis. There are also concerns of what will happen in a post-war environment, as the RVC and some similar groups are becoming very heavily armed through the fighting. With NATO affirming that Ukraine will join the alliance once the war is over, the nation will have to completely sever ties to those far-right groups, and there is serious concern of what might happen when it does. For now, though, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the RVC has proven useful on the battlefield. The Freedom of Russia Legion and the Russian Volunteer Corps would have their day in the sun, though, on May 22nd, when they shattered the illusion of border security for millions of Russians and nearly caused an international nuclear incident.
Wow.
Since the start of the war, there have been numerous cross-border attacks into Russia, though all very minor in scope. These have primarily taken place in the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod oblasts, with Ukraine denying responsibility for the attacks, but also not fully denying any involvement. The largest attack prior to May 22nd was a brief cross-border raid by the Russian Volunteer Corps in March 2023, with a small unit crossing into the Bryansk Oblast. According to Russian media, the RVC killed 2 adults and injured a child in a car, as well as taking residents from the Lubushain and Sushiny villages hostage for a brief time. The Rosgvardia, or Russian National Guard, was mobilized to expel the intruders. On May 22nd, the RVC and the Legion would join forces, using at least 1 tank and multiple armored vehicles. The invading force pushed through a Russian checkpoint in the Grevoronsky district. From there, the force took control of the villages of Kozinka, Goraporol, and Glotova.
There's one thing that I've noticed with this whole situation in Ukraine, though. The amount of news on it is certainly dying off. I understand that when you look at videos on YouTube, even the numbers are nowhere near as high as they used to be. It seems to me like the interest from the international community has died right down, okay? I'm not sure why that is. Obviously, everything gets stale after a while, but certainly with this whole Russia-Ukraine thing, people are, I don't want to say the word bored because people are losing lives over there, but it certainly looks that way now, okay? Even from a viewership perspective, I, turn off most of the news that I see on this now. It's really kind of running dry and we want to see an end to it, don't we?
Advance units reached all the way to Grevorol, the capital of the district, with the intent of creating a demilitarized zone that couldn't be used to launch attacks into Ukraine. The Russian government denied the attack was taking place, even as citizens uploaded panicked videos to Telegram and other social media channels, showing what it's like to get a fraction of a taste of what Ukrainian civilians have to endure. Locals called for help from the authorities, but while details remain foggy as of the writing of the script, the invasion force seemed to run into only light and token resistance, which was easily overcome. Local governments organized an evacuation of civilians using buses and any means of available transportation, with a number of evacuees numbering in the hundreds. However, the greatest concern was the perceived direction of the attack of the invasion, which put the Belgorod 22 nuclear weapons storage facility directly in its path. In a panic, the Russian government quickly began to move nuclear weapons out of the facility. Today, it still remains unknown if the facility was part of the invasion force's goals, but what is known is that at least one of the confirmed spearheads of the RVC Legion forces reached as far as only several miles from the facility.
Have you noticed, though, whilst we're on the topic of this whole nuclear thing, that was pushed massively last year? Like, that's all you heard on the news, nuclear this, nuclear that, there's going to be wars breaking out, there's a high chance that he might press the red button. Nuclear, got passed about left, right, and centre. And that's died down as well now. And I was saying for months and months and months when I was doing the updates that this is never a possibility. It's never going to happen. When you look at how nuclear war escalates in the first place and the reasons for it, this just didn't ooze nuclear war to me in the slightest anyway. We're talking about selfish individuals at the top here, and selfish individuals do not want, the repercussions and the negative consequences of nuclear war as well, all right, just like the rest of us. So they're very hesitant in pressing that red button, and I don't think we'll see nuclear war, and I've said it many, many times, within the next 50 years. I just don't think it'll happen, guys. So I've got that well out of my brain. And once they've clocked on that people have actually started to believe that as well, that it's not going to happen, they've stopped pushing it on media outlets. I'm not sure if you've realized that.
Had they been able to seize Russian nuclear weapons, it is unknown what would have happened or what the group would have intended to do with them. Perhaps they would have transferred them to Ukraine, who would no doubt had them as assurance that Russia would not resort to nukes of its own, or perhaps they would have held the weapons hostage in a bid to garner demands from the government. What is likely is that if the group had succeeded, the United States would have had no choice but to get involved somehow, and given the RVC's far-right ideologies, there is a chance that the US military involvement might have actually been on the side of Russia. The next day, the Russian Ministry of Defense claimed to have defeated all the invaders and either killed them or all driven them back across the border. Nobody bothered to tell the Legion or the RVC that, though, who launched a drone attack against the FSB building inside the city of Belgorod, scoring a direct hit. Amusingly, Russian officials claimed that the saboteurs had stolen police uniforms and that all Russian civilians in the affected region should shoot first and ask questions later if they spot a uniformed police officer. There is as yet no news of any Russian police officers accidentally murdered by trigger-happy civilians. Russia scrambled to muster forces to repel the invasion and launched multiple helicopter attacks, resulting in at least one confirmed downed helicopter. The Russian state also claimed to have destroyed multiple armored vehicles and captured more, even releasing images of captured American Humvees as proof. However, the captured vehicles don't bear the same markings as those clearly seen in use by the invasion forces and show no battle damage. Plus, the photos themselves are very closely cropped, prompting many to believe the photo op was obviously staged using captured Ukrainian equipment and fighting elsewhere. At last, the invasion force retreated back over the border after a 48-hour operation. The Russians claimed to have killed nearly all the invasion force and that it had identified all of them as Ukrainian. Meanwhile, the RVC and Legionnaires claimed they only suffered 2 dead and 10 wounded from the Legion, 2 wounded from the Russian Volunteer Corps. In exchange, the RVC and Legion expressed satisfaction with their raid, claiming to have captured at least 1 armored vehicle and several prisoners. The raid on Belgorod was a significant event in the ongoing Ukrainian war. It highlighted the critical vulnerability of the Russian motherland itself and just how poorly prepared Russia is for a Ukrainian incursion. As the fighting progressed...
Yeah, I think they are poorly prepared. And I think, obviously, that's going to escalate things further into this whole prospect of another world war. But isn't that the way to kind of stop this? I'm just trying to think differently. We keep on thinking how to defeat them within Ukraine, but isn't the answer defeating them within Russia? Now, I'm not for that. I just want to let that be clear. I'm not for any kind of escalation into other countries, but let's face it, if Russia got what they want through Ukraine, there's going to be further escalations into neighbouring countries. Places like Moldova, easy win. That's going to be taken in a heartbeat, guys, okay? So you can't say the same for the other side. I think they would take over Ukraine and push on through, all right? And other countries near that border would be a threat as well. So is the way to win in Ukraine actually in Russia? I don't know, guys. Let me know in the comments.
Russia rushed to mobilize a response force made up largely of the Rosguardia and local law enforcement, giving the small invasion force of less than an estimated 100 individuals 2 days to rampage through the countryside and allowed them to penetrate Russia within a dozen miles of a nuclear weapons storage facility. This highlights just how dependent Russia really is on America's pressure on Ukraine, forbidding it from launching cross-border attacks into Russia. Many have questioned since the raid why Ukraine shouldn't be allowed to fight this war as it sees fit, especially since Russia's use of standoff weapons and increasing use of glide bombs means that it can launch attacks deep into Ukraine from the safety of its own territory. Yet Ukraine remains completely dependent on the US and its allies, meaning that
very, very dependent, guys. Let's face it, without the allies, United States in particular, Britain, France, Germany, all of those countries, they'd be in big trouble. This would have been over a long, long time ago. I think just from a resupply perspective, the amount of munitions and ammo and weaponry that we've sent there, and I say we, the international community, they would have been well and truly screwed if they didn't have that, guys. So let's always remember that
its hands are tied. This affords Russia not just the ability to launch attacks from home territory, but the luxury of not committing significant border forces for security, freeing up thousands to fight on Ukrainian soil instead. It's hoped that increased support for groups like the Legion and the RVC could allow them to launch even more attacks into Russia, as the US appears to have no problems with Russians fighting Russians on their own soil. This could be a significant turning point in the war, as Russia is forced to remove forces from Ukraine to defend its borders adequately.
That was, I mean, that bit there could sum the whole thing up. Russia is forced to remove forces from Ukraine to defend its borders. I think that's where it's going to go.
With its military already vastly outclassed by Ukraine's smaller, better trained, motivated, and increasingly better equipped military, the forced removal of thousands of combat troops and assorted logistics could give Ukraine the edge it needs to quickly win this conflict. Now,
Troops, great video infographics as always. They're one of the good channels, one of my favorite channels, who allows us to react to content and allows us to have our say on it. The original video will be in the description, guys. Just want to say thank you for stopping by. I really appreciate it. I've been on a break for the past couple of weeks. I've had a few family things to deal with and stuff. Everything's okay now, all good. So we're back at this, guys. But yeah, I haven't forgotten about the boxing journey. As you can see, I am training, trying to keep in shape and fit. And yeah, we're going to be getting amongst it pretty soon, hopefully, guys, okay? But other than that, if you want to support me further, I'd really appreciate it if you join the Patreon, guys. That helps me out more than you could ever imagine. But wherever you are, I'll see you in the comments. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.